Welcome everyone to Fantasy Football 101. Now I've already done a video explaining how to play fantasy football, and I'll leave that in the link below so you can watch that video. In this video, I will be going over all the different terms that you're gonna come across when you're researching fantasy football. You might be reading any articles, so that way you're not lost, or if you're talking with any of your friends about fantasy football, you know the terms they're talking about. If you end up liking this video, hit that like or subscribe button or leave a comment down below. Let's get started. A handcuff normally is a backup running back for an NFL team who can produce just as well as the starter in front of him, but he's only going to be valuable is if the starter gets hurt. Bye week. Typically, every NFL team is going to have 1 week of the season where they do not play. So this isn't really incredibly important when drafting in most leagues, but you do need to pay attention to it because if you have a player on a bye, you're going to lose if you don't fill in that spot. Trade bait. This is typically a player who has a big name or someone that can produce, but it's not really valuable to your team. Typically, someone can do this where they have 2 to 3 quarterbacks on their team, or let's say 2 defenses, or 2 really good tight ends. They can use that as trade bait, or running backs and wide receivers, which are the hottest commodity in fantasy football. Stacking. This is where a manager takes 2 players and tries to do a combo for them so they can get double the reward, but it's also double the risk. For example, someone could play somebody like Tom Brady and Randy Moss in the same play, and they can get 10 points for a touchdown. Depending on the scoring, they can get 10 points off 1 touchdown pass. Or let's say Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. That's another way of stacking. Fantasy stud. Now, for this, all you gotta do is just get a stud finder and just put it over the player. Oh, what do you know? I mean,
No.
But fantasy stud, what it really stands for is basically a player who's going to produce every single week, week in, week out, regardless of matchup or whatever might be going on. He's always going to be a great player, a great start, someone that you just leave in your starting spot and you never take him out. Boom or bust. The definition of this is Amari Cooper, and all you Amari Cooper fans will understand that. Basically, with boom or bust, it means that a player is either going to give you pretty much 1 to 2 points or going to give you 30 points. This is typically deep threat players. They're usually only good for that one big play, or sometimes it's running backs where they're speedy guys and they just can bust out for one big play. Keeper league. This is where you're allowed to keep at least 1 or more players on your team from the year prior, and when you go into the draft, you get to keep those players for a set amount of years or however your league might want to do the rules for that. I find with keeper leagues, the best way to do it is 2 players a year. Dynasty League. This is pretty much a keeper league, except for instead of keeping 1 to 2 players, you keep your entire team, and typically the draft associates with all rookies. Auto draft. This is pretty much the term that you don't want to be called by your friends. It's when you pretty much don't care about your fantasy football league, you don't care about the money that you're probably going to lose, and you just let the computer draft your team for you. Every league has this player, and usually it's somebody that you either can't kick out of the league because they're a family member, or there's some other crazy tie, and people just want to take their money. FAB. Now I did another video with FAB going more in depth, but basically it stands for Free Agent Acquisition Budget, which basically you get to do silent bids for players to pick them off waiver wire. IDPs. This is individual defensive players. Now, this is something that is not very common in the fantasy football world. It's very difficult to do. Basically, the way it works is a defensive player gets points for tackle, sacks, forced turnovers, anything like that. PPR. This is points per reception. This is basically when a player gets a catch, they get a point or half a point depending on what your league setting scoring is. Cheat sheet. This is where you basically have a fixed sheet of ranking of all NFL players, and it just helps you figure out on who is the next best potential player to draft. This is really good to have if you're at a live draft. Mock draft. This is where you go ahead and you do a practice draft, usually done online, and this allows you to practice drafting in your league so you see what the draft is going to flow like. If you do end up doing this, I recommend doing it a few days before your draft, because if you do a draft in June, it is not going to look the same if you're doing it at the end of August. So many things change in that period of time. RBBC, running back by committee. Now this is usually a mess of a backfield to be playing with. Typically there is no designated starter or somebody who's going to get the bulk of the carries. It's going to be split between a group of guys. Auction draft. Now this is where you're going to be drafting players and everyone gets a set amount of fake money and then you bid on that player. This is kind of a fun way to do it. It mixes things up because you can bid on, like, if you really love Todd Gurley, you can bid 90% of your budget on him if you want. But the problem is the rest of your team is going to be complete garbage. So basically, you'll be in a bidding war with all the other managers to get the best overall team. Snake order draft. This is the way that most fantasy football drafts works. It's the only way it should work. So the player who gets the last pick, let's say they're the 10th pick overall, they end up getting in the second round the first pick. So they'll have the 10th and 11th pick. Vulture. This is where a running back steals all the touchdowns away from the primary running back or the primary starter for that team. That's it, you guys. If you liked the video, please hit that like or subscribe button down below. If I missed any terms, leave a comment down below. I'll be gladly to help you out if you need it. Once again, you guys, I'm Chris Holscher, and I'll see you in the next huddle. Ready, break! If you have any questions on any other terms that you might need me to cover, cover.